For over 50 years, Dale Evans smiled beside Roy Rogers as one half of America's most beloved couple. They sang together, raised children together, and built an empire that made them icons of wholesome family entertainment. Millions of fans saw them as the perfect partnership. But there was someone Dale Evans could barely stand to be around. Someone who made her life significantly harder. Someone she resented more deeply than most people ever knew. And no, it was not Roy Rogers. The person Dale struggled with most was actually much closer to the Rogers family than anyone outside their inner circle ever realized. This hatred was not the kind that ends a relationship overnight. It was quieter, more complicated, and far more painful because Dale had to live with it every single day. She could not simply walk away. She could not make it stop. And for years, she could not even talk about it publicly without risking everything she had worked so hard to build. So who was this person? And what did they do that made Dale Evans, a woman known for her faith and kindness, harbor such strong feelings? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. Long before Dale became a famous cowgirl, before she ever met Roy Rogers, and before Hollywood decided who she was allowed to be. Dale Evans was born Frances Octavia Smith on October 31, 1912, in Uvalde, Texas. Her childhood was not easy. She spent years living with her uncle in Arkansas, far from her parents, and that distance created a loneliness that stayed with her. She wanted family. She wanted to belong somewhere. And when she was only 14 years old, she thought she had found it. Frances ran away and married a man named Thomas Fox. She was still a child herself. At 15, she gave birth to a son, Tommy. Then, at 16, her husband left. Suddenly, Frances was alone again. But this time, she had a baby depending on her. She had no money, no career, and very few options. Most people in her situation would have given up. Frances did not. She turned to music. She started singing at radio stations in Memphis, playing piano, and doing whatever she could to earn enough money to keep Tommy fed and safe. Every dollar mattered. Every performance was a chance to survive one more week. Her talent eventually got her noticed, and when she moved to Louisville, a radio station manager told her that Frances Octavia Smith was too long for the airwaves. He suggested a new name. Dale Evans. That name would eventually become famous. But long before fame, it represented something much simpler. It was the name of a young mother fighting to build a life for her son. Dale's voice carried her forward. Radio work led to bigger opportunities, and eventually, Hollywood came calling. For a woman who had spent years scraping by, the chance to become a movie star must have seemed almost unbelievable. But Hollywood came with conditions. Studios in the 1930s and 1940s had very specific ideas about how their female stars should look and behave. They wanted women who appeared young, glamorous, and free from anything that might damage their marketable image. Dale Evans, the rising singer and actress, fit that description perfectly. But Frances Octavia Smith, teenage mother and abandoned wife, did not. The studio executives made their position clear. If Dale wanted a real career in Hollywood, Tommy could not be introduced as her son. The public could not know that she had been married and divorced as a teenager. That part of her life needed to disappear. Their solution was simple and cruel. Tommy would be presented as her younger brother. Not her son. Not the child she had worked herself to exhaustion to support. Her brother. For Dale, this was not just about changing a few facts in a press release. Tommy was everything to her. He was the reason she had sung in radio stations when she was exhausted. He was why she had kept moving forward when she had almost nothing. She had been his mother since she was 15 years old. And now, the industry offering her a chance at success was telling her she had to pretend that the most important relationship in her life did not exist. She agreed. Not because she wanted to, but because refusing meant losing the opportunity that could finally give her and Tommy financial security. So Dale Evans, the movie star, smiled for cameras and did interviews while maintaining the lie. And every single time someone asked about her family, she had to hide the truth. She had already been abandoned once. Now she was being forced to emotionally abandon her own son in public, even while caring for him in private. The pain of that choice would stay with her for decades. Then, in 1944, everything shifted again. Dale was cast alongside Roy Rogers in The Cowboy and the Senorita. Roy was already a massive star. Known as the King of the Cowboys, he had become one of the biggest names in Western entertainment. He was talented, charismatic, and beloved by audiences across America. At first, Dale and Roy were simply co-stars. Two professionals doing a job. But Roy's personal life was changing in a devastating way. His wife, Arlene Wilkins, had just given birth to their son, Roy Jr. Then, suddenly and tragically, Arlene died. Roy was left a widower with 3 young children and a career that demanded constant public appearances. He had fame and money, but none of that could fix the emptiness Arlene's death had created. Dale understood loss in a way that many people around Roy probably could not. She had raised a child alone. She knew what it felt like when someone you depended on disappeared. She knew the fear and the exhaustion that came with being solely responsible for young lives. So when Roy needed support, Dale was there. What started as a professional partnership slowly became something much deeper. They spent time together on and off set. Dale grew close to Roy's children. And Roy saw in Dale someone who understood the weight he was carrying. By 1947, Roy was ready to make their relationship permanent. His proposal was anything but private. According to accounts from people who were there, Roy proposed to Dale while sitting on Trigger, his famous horse, just before entering a rodeo arena in Chicago. Thousands of people watched. Dale said yes. On December 31, 1947, they were married. For Dale, this marriage meant more than just becoming Mrs. Roy Rogers. She was joining a family that included Cheryl, Linda Lou, and Roy Jr. She became a mother figure to children who had already lost their biological mother. And Roy, for his part, accepted Tommy. Finally, after years of pretending her son was her brother, Dale could publicly acknowledge the truth. Tommy was her son. She could say it out loud. That freedom mattered deeply to her. The family continued growing. Roy and Dale adopted more children, including Mimi, Dodie, Sandy, and Debbie. Their household became large and complex, filled with children from different backgrounds all coming together under one roof. From the outside, it looked like the American dream. And in many ways, it was. But inside that dream, there were tensions that the public never saw. One of those tensions involved someone who had significant influence over the Rogers household. Someone whose presence created frustration and resentment that Dale found increasingly difficult to manage. This person was not a stranger. They were not an outsider trying to interfere. They were family. And that made everything more complicated. Because when the person causing you pain is someone you are supposed to love, someone who is deeply connected to your husband and your home, you cannot simply cut them out of your life. You have to live with it. You have to smile through it. You have to pretend that everything is fine, even when it is not. In 1950, Dale experienced one of the most joyful moments of her life. She became pregnant with her first biological child with Roy. After everything she had been through, becoming a mother again felt like a new beginning. Their daughter, Robin Elizabeth Rogers, was born that year. But almost immediately, Dale and Roy learned that Robin had Down syndrome and serious health complications. In the 1950s, families were often told to hide children with disabilities. Some doctors even recommended placing these children in institutions rather than raising them at home. Hollywood made the pressure even worse. Dale and Roy were supposed to represent perfect American family life. There were people around them who believed that a child with disabilities could damage that carefully constructed image. But Dale and Roy refused to hide their daughter. They raised Robin at home and loved her openly. Dale especially became devoted to her. She spent as much time as possible with Robin, caring for her, holding her, and making sure her daughter knew she was wanted. But Dale did not get much time. In 1952, Robin died before reaching her second birthday. The loss devastated Dale in ways that most people could not fully understand. She had already experienced abandonment, poverty, forced separation from Tommy, and the pressure of building a career while hiding essential parts of herself. Now she had lost a child. The grief was overwhelming. But Dale did something unexpected. Instead of staying silent, she wrote a book. In 1953, Angel Unaware was published. It told Robin's story from an imagined perspective of the child herself. Dale was not just sharing her pain. She was giving Robin a voice and insisting that her daughter's short life had meaning. The book reached thousands of families dealing with similar situations. Parents who had been told to hide their children with disabilities suddenly had someone famous willing to speak openly about it. Dale's honesty gave them permission to do the same. But while Dale was pouring her heart into honoring Robin's memory, tensions inside her marriage were growing. And much of that tension centered on one person who had always been part of Roy's life. His mother. Mattie Sly Rogers had raised Roy and had strong opinions about how he should live, how his household should be run, and how his children should be raised. She was not a cruel woman. By most accounts, she genuinely cared about her family. But Mattie also believed she knew best. And when it came to decisions about the Rogers household, she made her views very clear. For Dale, this created an impossible situation. She was Roy's wife. She was the mother raising these children day after day. She was the one managing the household, dealing with the endless responsibilities, and trying to hold everything together while Roy traveled for work. But Mattie's influence meant that Dale's authority in her own home was constantly being questioned. It was not that Mattie openly challenged Dale in front of others. The problem was more subtle and therefore harder to fight. Mattie would make suggestions to Roy. She would offer opinions about how the children should be disciplined, what decisions should be made, and how things should be handled. And Roy, who loved and respected his mother deeply, often listened. Dale found herself in a position where her own judgment as a mother and wife was being undermined. Not by a stranger. Not by someone she could simply remove from her life. But by her mother-in-law. Someone who had every right to be part of the family. Someone Roy would never ask to step back. This was the source of Dale's deepest frustration. She could not confront Mattie directly without creating a rift in the family. She could not ask Roy to choose between his wife and his mother. And she certainly could not complain publicly without damaging the wholesome image that both their careers depended on. So Dale stayed quiet. She swallowed her frustration. She continued smiling for cameras while privately feeling that her own home was not fully hers to control. The resentment built slowly over years. Every time Mattie made a comment about the children, every time Roy deferred to his mother's judgment instead of Dale's, the hurt deepened. Dale had already spent years having Hollywood control her story. She had been forced to hide Tommy. She had been told how to present herself publicly. And now, even in her own marriage, she felt her voice being diminished. Then in 1964, another tragedy struck. Their adopted daughter Debbie died in a church bus accident. She was only 12 years old. The loss was sudden and senseless. Unlike Robin, whose health problems had at least given Dale some terrible warning, Debbie's death came without explanation. One moment she was alive. The next, she was gone. Dale was drowning in grief. She had now lost 2 children. She was exhausted from years of raising a large family largely on her own while Roy traveled. She was emotionally drained from constantly managing everyone's needs while her own feelings went unacknowledged. And through it all, Mattie's presence remained. The influence continued. The subtle undermining never quite stopped. Dale never publicly said she hated her mother-in-law. That was not the kind of woman she was. Her faith taught forgiveness. Her public image required grace. And perhaps, on some level, she understood that Mattie was only doing what she thought was right. But understanding something does not mean it does not hurt. Dale could acknowledge Mattie's good intentions while still resenting the years of feeling secondary in her own household. She could love Roy deeply while also being angry that he never fully protected her authority as a wife and mother. These feelings could exist together. Love and resentment. Gratitude and exhaustion. Faith and frustration. Dale Evans spent decades standing beside Roy Rogers, raising children, building a career, and maintaining an image of perfect partnership. But beneath that image was a woman who had fought her entire life for control over her own story. First, Hollywood took it from her. Then, in more subtle ways, her own family did too. The person Dale resented most was not someone evil. It was someone whose very presence reminded her that even in her own home, her voice was not always the one that mattered most. And that quiet, persistent pain was something Dale carried until the day she died.